tonight, what we plan to do is to discuss a few things about this second presentation deck. I'm going to upload the file to the Dropbox folder. Okay. And look, this will, I'm not expecting we'll spend a lot of time to discuss this one because my focus is really about the first assessment. Okay. The first assessment is due in the next couple of weeks. Okay, on the 26th of October. Now we are on the exactly 2 weeks. Okay, so yeah, let's discuss that. Okay. All right, so the entire presentation, right, we are not going to cover everything in here. The entire presentation will be basically focusing on the factors affecting the international business strategies, and we are going to look at it from the theoretical context. Okay, there are 3 theoretical framework that I'm going to bring to our discussion tonight. Okay, and after that we are going to expand that discussion based on this framework. Okay. Now, if you look at the international business strategies, actually, if we elevate that at the theoretical level, at least there are 3 foundations of theoretical foundations that help us understanding the international business strategies. Okay? We have the institutional context, resources or resource view, resource-based perspective theory, and also the social capital theory. Okay, the institutional context basically suggests that everybody or the social actors, that means us, the social actors, basically behave in a certain way determined by the institutions. Okay, so what are institutions? Institutions actually refer to a set of rules, both formal and informal rules. Okay, so they include, they will determine how we behave. Okay, so if you look at ourselves, for instance, okay, in our society we have rules, right? In both formal and informal rules. Okay, sometimes the rules are written, okay, formalized, right? Formalized, okay? Sometimes the rules are not written. So that goes back to the norms or values that we adopt in the society, okay? The next one is resources, where this is the resource-based perspective taken from the strategic management concept. The resource-based perspective actually suggests that companies need resources to compete. Okay, we need that. We need capabilities. We need assets. We need both traditional and non-traditional resources to compete. Okay. Now the social capital here is the one that has been recently suggested by scholars. Actually, well, it goes back to the studies can be traced back to the sociological theory, like institutional theory. Okay, the institutional theory is, by the way, guys, taken from the sociological or social theories when it comes to body of knowledge. Okay, the scholars who suggest the social capital theory basically propose the idea that hang on a second, yes, we live in the institutional context. Okay, so our behavior is determined by the institutions where we live. Okay, so the way we interact, okay, the way we interact with our friends, with our parents, with our brothers, sisters, and so on and so forth, are basically determined by the institutions, right? And in larger context in the society, the way we interact is also determined. Okay, and then the scholars suggest the social capital also remind us. Hang on a second. Does it mean we don't have the opportunity as a social actor? Does it mean we don't have the opportunity to influence the institutions instead? Okay, so they think in a different way. Okay, that well, actually, with our relationship, right, in the social capital, we actually expand it. We actually help to improve or to influence the institutions that we live. Okay, so in brief, the social capital actually reflects the assets gained or generated from the social relationship. Okay, that includes partnerships in the business context. Okay, that includes network, for instance. Okay, the way we network, the how we trade information, how we perform exchange in our social context, basically helps us to expand the resources, right? And in a broader sense, from the social perspective, we also have the opportunity to influence the institutions, right? So that's basically the framework in a nutshell. Okay, now let's have a look at the first one, the institutional context. Okay, so this is the one that we just discussed before. Okay, there are three framework that at least influence the international business strategies. Okay. Right now, the institutional when it comes to the institutional theory, okay, the business environment, as discussed before, consists of both formal and informal rules. Okay, so they influence how we behave in our business environment. Okay, we take business environment as part of the societies, the activities that we perform in the society. Okay, the institution reflects the humanly devised constraints, okay, that structure human interaction. Now, there are two things in here in terms of institutional theory, as we discussed briefly before. The formal rules, the formal and informal rules. The formal rules actually consist of all explicit rules. So they are written, they've been formalized, okay, such as the legislation and economic policies. Okay, so they determine, they influence our behavior. Okay, the informal rules actually consist of all implicit rules, okay, and slowly changing. So if we compare formal and informal rules, the informal rules actually change slowly. The values, the norms in the society change slowly. They change, okay, but with time. Okay. Now that actually, if we put them together, you may recall that in presentation one we discussed PAST model. Okay, that PAST model actually reflect the institution, the environment where we operate. If you like, it gives us the context where we operate. Okay, so PAST basically consists of those two formals and those informal and informal rules. Okay. Right. So one of the things here in terms of from culture perspective, from the informal perspective, is the culture. Okay. Now, culture in here reflects the value system that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. So that helps us differentiating one group to the other groups. Okay. And specifically, we talk about the language, for instance, religion, social structure, okay, which is basically about the way the society organizes its members, like the social class, for instance, okay, the education, the ethics, and so on and so forth. Okay? So there are some attributes that come under the culture. Okay. All right. Now, since we know that we can group ourselves based on cultural differences, okay, there are several approaches that we can also observe, right? Some scholars suggest we can look at the cultural differences based on the context approach, okay, whether it is high context or low context, okay. Some culture, basically low context, can be classified as low context. This culture is basically in this culture, basically the communication is usually taken at value without much reliance on unspoken context. Okay, so look at the, literally look at what is mentioned, for instance. Okay, high context actually requires suggests that the communication relies a lot on the underlying unspoken context. All right. So, for instance, in Japan, instead of saying no, for instance, you may have heard that the culture in Japan basically suggests, well, yes, we'll study it, we'll review it. Okay, instead of saying no, which is considered as head-on. Okay, so that's a bit of approach. One of the approaches in terms of differentiating culture. Okay. The next one is cluster approach. Scholars also suggest, okay, if cultures, if we have differences in terms of culture, why we can group them actually, we can cluster them, okay? So we can cluster them, let's say, based on cultural similarities, okay, or cultural proximity, okay? So we can also refer to, for instance, Ronan and Shankar clusters, okay? Or we can also look at GLOBE, the Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness Project. They also group people based on the culture group, okay? Or Huntington civilizations approach. Samuel, you may have heard the scholar's name, Samuel Huntington, okay? Now, Ronan and Shankar, for instance, group the cultures based on a number of categories here, like the Anglo, the Arab, Arabic culture group, the Eastern Europe, Far East, Germanic, Latin America, Latin Europe, for instance, Near East, Nordic, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so this is basically Ronan's suggestion. Okay, we can group people based on these cultures. Okay, well, of course, you can argue that there should be more than that. There may be more than that may not be included in the study. Okay. GLOBE takes a similar approach, if you like. There are some similarities in here as well, like the Anglo culture group, Eastern Europe, Germanic Europe, Latin America, and so on and so forth. Now, they also include the Confucian Asia and Middle East Asia, aside from the Southern Asia as well. So, slightly different in terms of groupings the culture. Okay. And from Huntington perspective, Samuel Huntington is quite popular with his book. He's famous with his book, The Clash of the Civilization. Okay, so he suggested that a civilization is the highest cultural grouping of people and the broadest level of cultural identity that people have. Okay, so we can look at the cultural differences based on the level of civilization. Okay, well, you can also argue then what are the measures to determine that this culture is more civilized and the other culture is not that civilized, or what is it? Can we measure it in that kind of linear metrics? Okay, and Huntington suggests that several cultural groups, the Africans, the Confucian, Hindu, Islamic, and so on and so forth. Okay, so they basically these cultural differences basically help us understanding. Okay, which one is more, which one is closer to our own culture. Okay, now think about it in the context of international business strategies. When we develop a strategy, let's say product strategy, for instance, okay, so we need to ensure, definitely we need to look at the cultural differentiation, the cultural differences in here, okay. The product that we develop in our home market may not work in the host market, okay. So people offer, okay, let's look at the culture component here, okay, whether that works in that in the host market or not. Okay, so we look at that. Therefore, the international business strategists actually look into studies around cultural differences. Okay, for instance, in food category, for instance, we may need to consider if the host market adopt mainly Hindu culture, for instance. Okay, we need to consider whether we need to have the vegetarian type of products, for instance, because Hindu people don't eat beef, for instance. Okay, so there should be something that we also need to adjust. Okay, and the same thing also applies to culture group that have that is basically related to Islamic culture, for instance. Okay, we need to consider the halal type of food. Okay, McDonald, for instance, McDonald is probably a classic example here where they try to adjust their offering across the globe, across the culture. Okay, in Sydney, for instance, if you look at the Bankstown area where we have the probably the largest Muslim population in Sydney, McDonald offers halal food, so they adjust their offering to that specific market. Okay, all right. So that's the cultural differences, and look, few things here. Sometimes when when it comes to culture approach, we from offering perspective, from product or service strategy perspective, we may need to consider the culture proximity. Okay, so where we mix something to the other things. Okay, we mix our offering to be to have what we call as cultural proximity to the target audience. Okay, so I put up a couple of images in here, like the Hollywood movies, for instance, using Asian actors such as Jet Li in the Fast, Furious, Thunderbolts, and the other Hollywood movies. Okay, and guys, if you watch James Bond, Tomorrow Never Dies, for instance, they also use Michelle Yeoh, a Malaysian actor. Okay, she speaks Mandarin, and I think she recently just starred another movie, The Crazy Rich Asian People, new movie. And the question here is to what extent it appeals to Asian consumers, and you also need to consider to what extent it appeals to the Western consumers and the other types of consumers as well. Okay, so yes, there is a mix of phases that we're expecting here. Okay, and what is the limit in terms of using these these phases? Okay. So that's type of questions that we also ask. When it comes to movie, for instance, we also need to raise that kind of questions. Okay. Think about this for a moment. Can James Bond be, an Oriental face, for instance? Well, we may be laughing when we have that kind of question. James Bond, if we write a short storyline about James Bond, it reflects British agent, okay, 007, and quite popular as a merchandise brand. So if we put Jackie Chan, for instance, playing James Bond, we may feel, hang on a second, that's a different taste. That is a different taste. Or if we put Will Smith, for instance, as James Bond to play James Bond, for instance, yeah, okay, there is quite strong in terms of brand as when it comes to considering the execution of it. Yeah. So there's a couple of things, guys, to as a thought in terms of using culture proximity, okay, when it comes to considering our product mix, okay, product assortment that we offer for the customers, okay. Okay, now this is probably this is actually my last one for tonight, and we are going to have to continue the culture difference, the institutional context tomorrow and next week. Okay, and after that we are going to discuss. Okay, there is another scholar suggesting the mentioned approach when it comes to cultural differences. Okay. this scholar Hofstad actually mentioned it. Hang on a second. Let's look at the power distance as well that they mentioned. Okay, as another angle to look at the cultural differences. Okay, he did a study in Asia Pacific region for IBM office at that time, and he looked at the what we call as the power distance. Okay, that reflects the extent to which less powerful members within a culture group expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. Okay, so that's that reflects the power distance. Okay, so if we have if we are less powerful, if we are less powerful members, all right, to what extent that we accept that the power is distributed unequally. If it is distributed unequally and we accept it and we behave differently, then the power distance is quite high. Okay? And he used a number of concepts as well here, like the individualism, collectivism, femininity, and masculinity, for instance, to reflect the mentioned approach as well. Okay, whether in the society we have more individualism, where they fundamentally the individual in the respect his or her own, basically. Okay, whilst collectivism is basically tied, they are tied to the identity of their collective group. Okay. Now, the femininity actually, to what extent that this culture actually believe that women occupy positions that reward assertiveness and men work in the caring professions. Okay, to what extent we accept that? Okay, guys, you may have heard the House Husband TV show, for instance. Okay, to what extent that we adopt that? Okay. Because some other culture may adopt more like the masculinity type of approach, where it is relatively, that culture accepts the fact that accepts the belief that men to have the occupations that reward assertiveness, and women tend to work in the caring professions, such as being the housewife, for instance, look after the family, look after the children, look after the husband, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the mentioned approach that Hofstad suggested. Okay, guys, we are not going to continue this one here. Tomorrow we are going to look at the formal institution. So tonight we discussed the free theoretical framework. Okay. And we started our discussion with the institutional context, okay, institutional theory, if you like, the social capital theory, and we also discussed briefly discussed the resource-based perspective, which is taken from the strategic management concepts. Okay, so they are the theoretical framework that we discussed. Okay, and we started our discussion at the with the cultural differences, the informal institution. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, nothing from me.
No? Okay. How about you, Davis?
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Right. Okay. Now, if you don't have any question, all right, can I suggest we discuss about the assessments, okay? Because I am expecting you may have some questions about the assessment. Okay. Oops, sorry. Let me just. Okay, so are we okay with the assessment so far, or you need more, hands, a bit more help from me? Have we decided the companies? Yeah, have you all decided the company and the nominated two markets?
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic, yes. Fantastic. Okay. Look, don't get bogged down with the markets, okay? And because you need to, these are the main points that we need to bring, that you need to analyze: the macro environmental forces and micro environmental actors. Okay, pretty much the first presentation sets that I uploaded. Okay, and after that we evaluate we perform the evaluation metrics. Okay, then summarize it. That's it. That's basically the assessment all about. Okay, right. Any questions about the assessment?
No.
No, Davis.
Nope.
I remember you said that we can talk more on some areas, like if we talk of competitors, we can touch more compared to other micro environment. Is that true?
What do you mean by talk more about the other micro environment? Sorry. What's the context?
I think when you talk of micro environment, competitors seem to have more impact.
Oh, right. Okay. I got you. Look, I think competitors, customers, okay, deserve your, your attention. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, suppliers sometimes, if suppliers may also determine, may also affect the business. Okay. But at some point of time, suppliers may, the position of the suppliers may be neutral. Okay, maybe neutral. Okay, because especially if you source the products from overseas, for instance, okay, and your suppliers have the same level of capabilities to deliver that from supply chain perspective, then shouldn't be a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Does it answer your question, Davis?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Any more questions? Are we okay with the writing and also the Turnitin similarity index? Yeah, we okay with that? Yeah. Okay. Look, yesterday I was on campus and I met the online support team. And if you need help, you can click on the library websites to find the online support team. You can send them your draft note to me, okay, to get feedback about the writing and so on and so forth, just in case you need it. Yeah. All right. Look, if you don't have any questions, okay, I'll off you from the hook. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow, and I hope I hope to have more questions from you tomorrow. Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, brilliant. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
You have a good weekend.
You too.
You too. Bye.
Bye.